Well, last week with the weather the way it was, we kind of called a bit of an audible as far as the sermon service sort of thing went. And so I'm going to just share today what I had planned for last week as we finish up this series called Lead. And this is a 4-week series. And we're looking at this question: do you see yourself as a leader? And maybe you don't because you're like, well, I don't have anyone that works under me, reports to me, or I'm just kind of on my own, or I don't have any influence or whatever. And I would say you might want to rethink that, because in some way, in almost every area of our lives, we are leaders. And I think it's important that we see ourselves as leaders, especially if we're Christ followers, because the way that we can use our influence is going to have effects not just for the here and now, but for the hereafter. And what we're able to do with our lives through helping others and serving others, really living for Christ, is again going to have lasting, long-term, eternal sort of effects. We should want our everyday lives of leadership to really make a difference. So today we're going to talk about probably the most difficult aspect of life, and the most difficult aspect of everyday leadership, maybe even at your work or in your relationships or any sort of thing, and that is change. Today we're going to talk about leading change. Change is difficult. We resist change. And it seems really foolish if we think about it, but on the other hand, it seems too difficult to really manage, because sometimes it seems easier to just do the same thing in the same way with no results than to try to change anything in that situation. We'd rather just kind of spin our wheels like you may have on the roads early this week than to try something different. It seems easier sometimes to live in an unhealthy relationship than to try to change or improve that relationship. It's just too much work, too much hassle, too much stress, too much hurt, too much at risk for me to try to change or adapt or tweak anything about this relationship, so I'm just going to live in this unhealthy, toxic environment. It seems easier to do that than to change. Sometimes it seems easier to keep making the same mistakes over and over instead of changing certain behaviors or patterns of behavior. Yeah, I keep giving into this and I keep messing up here, but if I try to change something, everything else might fall apart, and it's not worth the risk. Change is hard. We resist change. And many times it seems easier to complain about a situation than to do something to change it. Sometimes it's more fun to do that. Complaining can sometimes be fun, right? If we're honest, it feels like we're getting it off our chest, but the problem that we have here is that we tend to complain about the same sort of couple, 2, 3 things over and over our entire lives. And it seems more work to try to change it, but the work is worth it, as we'll talk about here today. Because just because change is difficult and it seems difficult doesn't mean it's not essential. In many ways, change is inevitable, right? It just happens. If you don't change with what's going on around you, you will get left behind, sometimes culturally or technologically, those types of things. But even in our everyday sort of lives, in our relationships, at our workplaces, in our homes, change is essential for our lives of leadership. Think about this. Think about how the modern NFL player plays. Fast, they hit hard. Now imagine if we still wore leather helmets. That'd be a problem. You think concussions is a problem now, with nice padded helmets and all these safety procedures. If they wore leather helmets, we got dudes on the field every game, every week, okay? So change is important. Adapting to the way things change is important. And you think back to the early 60s in John F. Kennedy's inaugural speech. He goes over this list of his vision for the coming decade. And in that speech, he even talks about landing a person on the moon, which at that point you thought was probably not going to happen, especially at the end of the decade here. But he said, we're going to do all these things. And he said, we're not going to do them because they are easy, but because they are hard. That's a weird statement to make. We're going to do these things because they are hard. But the things that are hard are the things that are worth doing. And so leading change in your life is hard, but it's worth doing. So today we're going to look at 7 keys or steps to leading change in your life. Now you can use either word you want, okay? So if you have like a foot problem, then we won't talk about steps. We'll make them keys, okay? But if you still have some extra pounds after Thanksgiving to get rid of, we'll make our steps together. We'll take at least 7 steps on your little, device. You get some steps in today. 7 steps or keys on leading change in your life. And along the way, we're going to look at a few biblical leaders to apply these principles and how they did it and how it paid off for them. Because even for people in the Bible, you realize they're real people, right? These are actual people that lived real lives, that really existed, that really had issues and families and relationships and complexity and stress, okay? And so these leaders that we're going to talk about, they dealt with the same types of things that we do 2, 3, 4,000 years later. So they did it, and they're our example to see that we can do it too. We can lead change in our lives. So the first key or step to leading change in your life is simple, but maybe not simple at the same time. And that's simply to establish a sense of urgency. Basically, it's saying there is a problem here in this area. There is something that needs to change in this area, or at my job, or in this relationship. Something has to give, and I have to be proactive in taking that first step to do it. A sense of urgency. Basically, it's saying no more. This stops now. This changes now. What we're doing isn't working, so we've got to change. We've got to adapt. The status quo is no longer acceptable to me in this area, in this relationship, at my workplace, whatever it is. And it's basically saying this is not healthy and not productive. Something has to be done. And let me give you some examples of what that might look like in your life. So maybe you're married and you see our communication's not great. So we can still avoid each other and communicate by not communicating, which isn't working. Or maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum. We can keep yelling at each other all the time. That gets us nowhere. We can keep doing it and doing it and doing it and probably won't last very long. And even if it does, it's not a healthy existence. It's not a whole existence. So something has to change in the way that we communicate. Maybe as parents, you see the way that you discipline is not working, because as kids get older, you have to adapt how we discipline. Kim and I know this all too well. I'll give you an example of that later on about how even this week we've kind of had to go back to what we had said we were going to do and haven't done, and so it'll make sense. But we see that sometimes the way I'm disciplining my kids isn't working. And so I can continue to put Johnny in the corner until he's 35. It's probably not going to work at that point. And so we're going to have to adapt sometimes in that area too. Maybe even you see your health declining. And you can say, well, I lived a great life of 43 years or whatever, or whatever the case may be. Or you could say, okay, let's adapt this. I'd like to live a little bit longer. I'd like to enjoy grandkids. I'd like to enjoy a long, fruitful life. Or maybe this habit's causing this problem, and you say, okay, it's going to be hard to kick this habit. It's going to be excruciating at times. I'm going to hate everyone around me, but in the end, it's for my benefit that I do this. Maybe you're the one that keeps ruining relationships. There's a common denominator in the rubble around me of relationships, and it's me. So maybe we get really introspective today and see, okay, maybe I need to change, and that's what we're going to focus on. Not everybody else and everything else should change to fit me and my preferences and my life and the way I see things and what I want to do, but maybe I should do some changing. Maybe that's what we're going to look at a little bit today too. So there's an example in the Old Testament, and we covered this leader last year, but his name was Nehemiah. And he was a Jew living in exile, and 140 years have passed, and he gets this report about how his hometown of Jerusalem is. Now, it's not really his hometown. He's never lived there. He's been over 1,000 miles away in a different city under foreign occupation. But he gets this report that the walls around the city of Jerusalem are in rubble. And this is not new. This has been the case for 140 years. But Nehemiah, he has this sense of urgency when he hears this report. And here's his response. Nehemiah 1 verse 4. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So Nehemiah decides something needs to change. Something has got to change. It's been the same for 140 years, and the reason he's so upset about this situation is, okay, the people have been going back to Jerusalem to build up this city now for 140 years, but there's no protective barrier around it to keep them from getting overthrown all over again. So he decides no one has done anything for this long. He has a sense of urgency. This bothered him so badly that he decided, I've got to do something. If nobody else is going to do anything to start change, I'll do what I can. And so he leads this several-week sort of investigation and rebuilding of the walls. It took them really less than 6 weeks to get this job done under his leadership because he had this sense of urgency. He said, I'm responsible to do what I can to see that change happens. Urgency includes a call to action. See, the series is called Lead. So we're talking about leading change, not waiting for change to happen, not hoping that eventually something will give, not anticipating that they're going to change or this is going to change, but that I need to change and I need to do something to enact and lead change in my life. Don't wait. It's almost like an infomercial. Don't wait, act now. You know, if leading change in your life is like that. And so we want to establish that sense of urgency to lead change in our lives. The second step or key in leading change is then to build a change team. So change is sort of like tug of war. On one end is you. On the other end is this huge thing that you're trying to change. Whether it's an institution or a way of thinking or someone else in a relationship. Okay, so it's big, it's heavy. You can maybe muscle it enough to pull it across the line to get a small victory here and there. But if you can get other people around you on board to see that this change is necessary and we can do this together, it's going to make the change so much easier and so much longer lasting and so much more beneficial for more people than just you. And so we see this example in the Old Testament as well with Moses, pretty popular leader. So Moses has a problem. He's basically trying to lead 2 to 3 million people all by himself. And there's a story where he's basically judging these people's disputes day and night, non-stop. We're talking literally all the time. He's just, Judge Moses. He could have his own, TV show where people come before him with all these issues and he judges one or the other. So his father-in-law, Jethro, great name, by the way, Jethro, he comes up and he says, hey, yee, howdy. Not that Jethro. So Jethro, his father-in-law, comes up to him and he says, hey, what you're doing is not good. That's what the scripture says. What you're doing is not good. You're going to kill yourself. He says, you need help. You have to change, and he said, you've got to set up this team around you to help you do what you're doing, because you can't do this. It's not going to work. It's not working that great, and you're going to wear yourself out. And so Jethro he's a pretty wise guy. He devises this plan. He sort of sets up a court system. He says, I need you to get these people together and say, hey, you're going to judge over this group of 1,000 people. And then you're going to get this person and say, hey, you're going to basically get 10 more guys and say, hey, if they can't figure it out, you're going to judge over these 100. And then if they can't figure it out, you're going to get this guy up on the list. He's going to do, these 10. If these can't figure it out, you're going to judge these 10 people. And then if those guys can't figure it out, they can come to you at the top. So he says, you're trying to do all of this for millions of people, and you just need a team to get on board to help you with this change. So Moses could have said, no, I'm good. I'll make it. I'll be fine. I won't wear out that fast. It'll take me longer to train them than it will for me just to do it myself. You know what that sounds like? Me. It sounds like me. I would say something like that. No, I'm good. I'm fine. It would just take longer to explain the process and train them than I can just do it. I'll just do it better. I'll do it quicker. I know what I'm looking for. I don't have to go through a middleman. I'm fine. That's a terrible philosophy. That is a really great way to not last very long. And so Moses decided, hey, this sounds like a great idea. And so he did it, and guess what? It worked. It worked. He got a team on board to help the change progress. So we need as many people on board as we can with this change team. I'm going to kind of combine points 2 and 3 in this way, because how we build a team, the main way is through buy-in. And so we do that when we, number 3, develop a vision and a strategy. Proverbs 29 verse 18 says, "Where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint, but blessed is he who keeps the law." So Proverbs says where there's no vision, there's no restraint and no results. So basically what we're saying here is when you get this team together, you got to have a vision of where you're going, what the change is, and more importantly, why we're making it. So the most important question to answer when making a change is why? Why is it important that we move in this direction? What is so awful about what's going on that we need to change course? Why is the most important question to answer? So we'll go back to Nehemiah. His why was Jerusalem's susceptible to an attack because there's no wall. That was his why. And he got a team mobilized to build a wall around an entire city in less than 7 weeks. Moses' why that we just talked about was he was prone to burnout. And here's the thing about Moses that I failed to mention, is that if Moses had kept that leadership strategy, I'm the guy to handle all the problems, what's going to happen when he's gone? There's going to be a leadership vacuum. And I won't say that, never mind. Okay, it was a really good one, but I probably shouldn't say it. All right, so leadership vacuums are bad. I'll just say it that way. If you don't know where I'm going with that, you can ask me afterward, and I'll tell you, not in a microphone on camera. All right, so anyway, all right. It was iffy. It would have been good, but now I've just ruined the whole thing. It's like when you over-explain a joke. That's what I'm doing right now without even telling the joke. That's why I don't do stand-up. All right, so if Moses had left this vacuum, who's going to fill in the gap? How are things going to progress? So that was what was at stake. That was his why, which is the most important thing to answer. You have to know where you're going in order to get there, right? Or else you're wandering around aimlessly, and that's not a great way to live life. So this is true. Let's go back to, again, we're combining the aspect of building a team and doing it with a vision and strategy. So let's go back to this marriage example. So maybe you get with your spouse and you say, hey, we need to change communication. So be intentional about that. Set some goals. Like maybe you need to really actually put it on your calendar. We're going to get together Tuesday night and we're just going to talk. That's what we're going to do. Maybe you have to actually do that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you've got to put it on the calendar and schedule in, do it. It's worth it. It's a great appointment to have on your calendar. And then maybe you need to actually schedule times to get together after that initial one. Have more of a strategy than just the next step, but look a little bit longer into the future on how we can kind of help this relationship and our communication progress. Maybe if you're a parent and you're going to change the kind of the discipline structure, you want to get your kids on board with that, right? They're going to be part of that team, and you have to give buy-in by communicating to them what's about to happen. Okay, we're going to change the way that we do things. We're going to have this system in place, and these are our expectations. You can't just all of a sudden switch and be a totally different kind of parent because your kids are going to be like, what's going on? Did they go to like a parenting seminar over the weekend? They learned all these tactics that I'm super surprised now. It's like Parent Ninja. It's not good for our kids. We have to let them in as part of the team on how we're going to change that strategy. So here's the other part of that. This works in every area of life, even if a team's not necessarily involved in the change. And that sounds confusing, but here's what I mean. So let's say you decide to change your career. You probably don't just want to quit your job as step one, right? You want to have maybe more of a plan than that. I hate it here. I quit. What am I going to do? Maybe you've done that before and you're like, that's a really bad idea. Don't do it. You maybe want to have a plan. Start looking around. Start thinking, what do I want to do that's not this? And then start looking in that field. And it sounds very obvious, but sometimes we don't think straight when we're in the middle of these situations. And so maybe it's going to be helpful maybe just to hear that said out loud. Maybe you do have a change you want to make in your physical life, a weight loss goal or a fitness goal. Don't just please don't do this. I'm going to lose weight. That's not a plan. That's a wish, okay? That's what that is. Make a plan. So maybe you want to set like a 60-day goal and make it reasonable. Maybe make it low-hanging fruit for a while and then challenge yourself because the results, as we'll talk about later on, will help to propel future results. That's great. So make a plan. You have to know where you're going in order to get there. And maybe you're serious about spiritual growth. I know we're kind of getting toward the end of the year and thinking about the new year and resolutions and things we do want to change in our lives. Maybe you look back at your spiritual condition, you're like, okay, this is not great. Like that, this is not where I'd like to be spiritually. This is not how invested I want to be spiritually. Something's got to change. So maybe you want to look for a devotional, because maybe you look at the Bible and it's thick and there's a lot in there, and we don't really know. I mean, you start at the beginning of the book and you're like, well, it's kind of lose interest after a while. And I've read these stories a lot, so maybe it would be better and more beneficial to find some sort of devotional to get kick-started on that. Again, have a plan to go into this for making change. And let me just quickly segue into this, kind of about our next vision step for our church that we've talked about this year, and that's the home project. It's a great segue into that. This is kind of our next step. This is our vision for the near future here, is we're basically trying to raise funds for a future facility. That's where we're going. Now the question is why. So I have these. I know we got these a long time ago. I have a few of these left. Some information packets. There's also a link on the Bible app to this same information, and it just gives the question of why. And that's the first question, except for what we're doing, that we answer with this basically info packet that we have on this project. Why are we doing this? And really, two things. One, mobile was never our long-term strategy. Some churches it is, and that's great, and they have a method for that, and that wasn't our plan. So it's an obvious second next step. And then why we're doing that now, it seems like we're kind of getting to that point. It's kind of a feeling sort of thing. So you're gonna have to trust me on that. That we're just kind of ready to make that move in the near future. And really the why is there's, as you know, limitations to the mobile way of doing church. There just are so many limitations. I can't even begin to get into those. We'll be here for an hour and a half. And that means on the flip side, there is more that we can do in and with and for and through our community with a facility that we don't have to come in on a Sunday for 2 hours and then leave immediately. And so that's really the why behind it. There's more details to it, so you can get that if you want there. But so I'll just say we're about a third of the way through our timeline on that and about a sixth of the way budgeted. So we got some work to do. And so if you're looking at like a year-end gift, just make that check out to homeproject@firstcentury.com or just whatever. That was a website. Don't write a check to a website. That doesn't, unless you're paying for a website, then I guess you could do that. So I just wanted to plug that in there. That's our next step. And so we have a vision, we have a plan, we've got things that we're working toward. And so hopefully that's encouraging to see that it doesn't just work in a situation or in just your situation or in a personal situation, but even here as a body, as a group, as a church, we have that same mindset that it takes a plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I got as corny as I could to bring that home. So here's the fourth step in this process of leading change, and this is a big one. It's an important one, and that is to celebrate every win. Maybe one of the most important steps, because since change is so hard, it can get very discouraging. Like if you're not seeing progress for a long enough period of time, it's going to get hard. So when you do make progress, fireworks, like yay, we're gonna celebrate this win, this progress that we've made. And that's why really a strategy is so important, because you can see where the wins are. You're not just blindsided. I think we're closer than we were. I think I know that I've progressed in this area. I think we communicate better. I don't have any real data to go off of or any experience to go off of. I just think that we are. But if you've got this goal, this plan in place that you've made with this team on board, then you'll see, hey, we've crossed this barrier. We've done this. This is amazing. And Israel did this. In 1 Samuel, there's a story where the Philistines really ambushed an Israelite army, and they are way outnumbered. They should never have won. And so Samuel decides, I better pray really quick. And so Samuel decides, I'm going to pray so this army's not destroyed. And so he prays and he fasts and he makes an offering, a sacrifice to God. And so the scripture says that when the Philistine army came to attack the Israelite army, God sent confusion into the Philistine army. And they didn't know, and these are trained killing machines. They know what they're doing, okay? And they had no idea the front from back and side from side. They didn't know what to do, and the Israelite army slaughtered them easily. Outnumbered, outgunned, outmanned, outtrained, and they still did it. And so here's what Samuel knew he had to do. He had to celebrate the win. And so in 1 Samuel 7, verse 12, here's what he does. Samuel then took a large stone and placed it between the towns of Mizpah and Jeshanah. That's where the battle took place. He named it Ebenezer. It's perfect for Christmas time, isn't it? He named it Ebenezer, which means the stone of help. For he said, up to this point, the Lord has helped us. Samuel knew the importance of celebrating wins. It's going to be too easy later on in a different battle to forget how gracious God was. To remember the situation. We were ambushed by a well-trained army, and we were victorious. We need to commemorate that. We need to celebrate God giving us this victory, because later on we're going to need that encouragement. So that's what Samuel knew was so important. Celebrate the wins in the change that you're trying to make, the progress that you're making as you lead change. Now, typically we stop there. Yay, we've made some change. We're done. Now, unless you've gotten all the way to the end of the goal, you're not done yet, right? So there's 3 more steps, and the 5th one is, I said the 4th one was the most important. The 5th one maybe is the most important one. And that is this: build on the wins. Whatever progress there is, build on it until the mission's complete, until all the boxes are checked, until there's been a noticeable change in this situation that you're in the middle of. Because there could be temptation to think, this is good enough. But the problem is we go back to step number 1 at that point. No. Halfway is not good enough. Partial change is not completely acceptable. It's good, we celebrate that, but then we build on that toward complete change, toward continued change. So we have to go kind of back to step 1 to build on these wins. The summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I worked where my dad has worked my whole life, Toyota Motor Manufacturing in Georgetown, Kentucky. They build the Camry there. Shout out to my dad. Shout out to Camry. All right. I'm not trying to get a free car or anything. It doesn't work that way. But there's a Japanese word that I learned that summer that has stuck with me ever since, and that word is Kaizen. It means continuous improvement. It's this idea that maybe things are okay, but could they be even better? Maybe you've seen partial change in a situation or in a relationship, but how can it be even better? How can that communication with you and your spouse be even better? How can this relationship with your friend be even healthier? How can your workplace environment be an even better place to work, and how can you be a part of making it that way? So it's continuous, not being content with status quo, not being content with step 2 of 10. Celebrate that step 2, but then move on to the next one until we reach the end and meet the final goal. That's what that word means. And maybe you're more familiar with Dave Ramsey. He has, in his model, he has this thing called the debt snowball, where you line up all your debts that you owe, and then you pay the smallest one off, and it's good. And then what you do, you keep that momentum building. You build on the win, and so then you take the money you're paying that first one off and pay the next one off. And it goes slow at first, but then you see a little bit of progress. You celebrate the win, and then you keep going. The snowball goes down the mountain until that debt is gone. It's the same idea with change in your life, in your relationships, in whatever situation you see you need change. We build on the success. We don't stay halfway down, well, we're good. Okay? We want to guard against plateaus, basically is what we're doing here. I'm not satisfied with this because there's more left to do. I'm not satisfied with just this one win or these 2 wins or this even huge progress until we reach the end goal. We want to see this to the end. And our lives are really that way. Philippians 1 verse 6, Paul says, he says, I'm certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. We are all works in progress. We are not finished products just yet. So why would I be satisfied with where I am right now in any area of life when there's still more that can be done? There's more that can be accomplished. There's more good that I can do. There's more good that God can do in me and through me. I want to build on the wins in my life. So as works in progress, let's keep working toward progress in life. Step number 6 is humbly admit defeats or setbacks. This is a hard one, but we're not always going to get this thing right every time. There are going to be times where we drop the ball, and so it's important that when we do that, we own it. We own mistakes instead of ignoring them, because that regresses. The progress that we've made in this situation or relationship or area of life or toward this goal, if we drop the ball and don't own that, it sets us back. So we have to own that. We want to embrace our weaknesses without using them as an excuse, because that's the easy thing to do. Oh, well, it's just this, or it's only that, or it's not that big of a deal, or it's not my fault. So we can see weaknesses, but not use them as an excuse to not continue to change. We don't want to hide or deny when we're wrong. That's not a fix. That's not an option. And so, again, go back to the examples we've been talking about throughout this morning. If we drop the ball with communication with our spouse, just make that known. Again, set that meeting and say, I've really not been doing a great job in this area, and we need to keep working on it. Or we've really lost touch over the last weeks or months. We've got to revisit this and make it a priority in our marriage. And maybe you've been inconsistent with discipline with your kids, and we do that. We've all done that. We've all been there. So ignoring that is not going to help. And changing strategy midstream just because you didn't do it right the first time isn't going to help. And so the example that I mentioned earlier that I was going to say is, Kim and I had this thing where we had a limit on how often the kids use their devices, right? But with them having been home this last week straight, it's and even before that, but it's easy to get lax in that because I've got to do this thing. It's just easier if they're on their tablet for an extra half hour, right? It's just easier if they can just be, calm and quiet and watching YouTube, and it turns into 6 hours. Maybe not. Sometimes it might. I don't know. If you're in the basement cleaning out your basement. But here's the thing. No, that wasn't meant to be mean, but may have come out that way. So I'm sorry if it did. I will humbly admit my defeat and my setback right now in our communication. No, but we can do that. And so even this last week, we had to revisit with the kids. Okay, and I had to tell them, okay, we had this a long time ago, and we're going to have to restart this because we've been on these way too much lately, and it's not good. And so we had to, sit down with the team and tell them we got to admit, Dad messed up. He wasn't as stern on this as he said he was going to be and should have been, and so we're going to go back to the plan. We're going to get back on the plan. And so that's what we have to do is be consistent. And if we're not, revisit the plan. Go back to where you started. And here's the real key, is that when we admit mistakes, we have to learn and keep going despite those. And I'll use a football analogy. Our head chief, Big Red, Andy Reid, he's great at this. If you listen to a press conference of his after they lose a game, which is not that often, but if you listen, here's what you're going to hear him say every time. He's going to say, they're going to ask him questions about, well, what about the defense? Guess what? He takes the blame for the defense. Is he the defensive coordinator? No, but he takes the bullet for the defensive coordinator. He says, yeah, I got to do better. I got to get better at that. And he'll even sometimes say, we've got to get better, but he'll always say, I've got to get better. I've got to be better. I love that about him. He's a great leader because he'll take the bullet for the guys under him that really it probably is their fault, or the player did do something wrong and say, yeah, I got to get better. I got to game plan better. I got to coach better. That's great leadership. That's what we have to learn to do. Even with setbacks or defeats, say, yep, I'll own that. I'll take the hit on that. Let's keep going. Because, again, the tendency is, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to not make any more mistakes. It's like I'm on this frozen pond and it's melting all around me. If I move and make another mistake, I'm a goner. No, it's like, no, we're going to own the mistake and then still move forward to continue leading change. Ask questions like, what caused me to take this step back? What makes me susceptible to setbacks like this? What change do I have to make in my plan to be more successful in seeing it to the end? And that's what we have to humbly admit, defeats and setbacks. The last step as we close today is simply this: stick with it for the long run. And I know that's kind of redundant, but it's just so important because there's a tendency, even if you've reached the end, you've won at the end. The final battle in the war is won, and I've seen change, and I've changed, and this is better, and this is healthy, and I've done it, great. There's a tendency, human nature, to kind of go back to what's familiar. If you're trying to break a 40-year-old habit and you get there and you've done it for even a couple of years, there's still going to be that lingering thing inside of you that wants to revert back to what you knew for the previous 40 years. It's just human nature. So we have to have with the end goal in mind being this is now the new normal. It's not a change for a few months or for a couple of years or so things will calm down or so this will normalize or so I can feel better about myself. No, this is now how it's going to be. This is it. This is the new normal. We've already established that change is hard, but don't give up. 2 scriptures as we close today. The first is Philippians 4:13. Paul writes, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, even change. Even lead change. You can do it. Is it hard? Yes. Is it long and a terrible process at times? Yes. But we can do all things through Christ because he's the one that strengthens us. Galatians 6:9, Paul writes this as well. Let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. The changes that you're making in your life will eventually become easier. Okay? They will. And you will eventually see the benefits of those changes. It may take some time, and you may have a few setbacks, and you may even get back to point number 1. Oh, I thought I was over this, or I thought I had figured this out, or I thought we had fixed this. I thought this was better, and now we're back. It's worse than ever. Don't give up. Keep step 1, do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Don't give up. Don't grow weary, Paul says. We will see positive, lasting results from the changes that we make as we rely upon the strength of the Holy Spirit. So, change is hard, but it's worth the work. It is. It just is. So let me encourage you with this, just a quick recap. Don't wait for change to happen in your life. Lead the change that needs to happen in your life. Take ownership of the change and go for it. Get others on board as necessary with a vision and a plan. Know where you're going before you start going there. Celebrate every step in the right direction and then build on that momentum in your life. Admit your faults, mistakes, setbacks, inconsistencies, but don't quit. Change is hard, it's grueling, it's work, but it's worth the work. So my heart, my passion, my encouragement is, especially with the holidays around, you're going to be around family that you're not always around, and maybe the last time you saw them, it wasn't that great. Or maybe something was said, last Christmas, and that's the last thing you said, and it's just been rough. And so the thing is, let's work even in the coming weeks on change. Let's pray the prayer of David in the Psalms. God, search my heart. See if there's any wicked way in me. Help me to start the change. Melt my heart. Help me to see the change I want to see at work with my boss or with a coworker that's really difficult. Help the change to start right here, numero uno, in my own heart, in my own life, in my own spirit. And as we do that, we will see good come from that as we lead change in our lives.